This is Caneel Joyce, and welcome to Aloud. Today we have on the podcast my friend and collaborator, Matt Auron. And he is a founding partner of Evolution, a firm, a coaching collective that you've heard me speak about multiple times. We've had a few guests on the show who are also partners in Evolution, so you can go back and listen to those episodes with Luke, David, Janet, and Christine. And we'll put a link to those in the show notes at caneel.com/podcast. Today is the man who helped to put that incredible collection of coaches and trainers together. And this guy got started on this line of work. I believe he's in his late teens, early 20s when you first went to.
That's right.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about how Matt got into this line of work of really working with human systems and human psychology and supporting the development of leaders in all areas of their lives. So this is an episode about men, but it's really important for everybody. Is that right, Matt?
Why is that? Right. That is right. Yes. We're going to talk about men. We're going to talk about leadership development, and it will be in some ways as or more useful for women and those that support men in terms of understanding what that journey is like and some insight into the dynamics of it. And in some ways, I think it would be more useful, but also for men to understand the developmental stages that they go through and some of the dynamics that we kind of understand in our culture in broad strokes, like the midlife crisis, like young men, being out in the world, conquering in some ways that are less healthy or helpful. All of those things we are going to provide context for and some utility to move through it and evolve.
It's an incredibly useful layer of insight and perspective for our female leaders out there as well, who are working with men and relating to them. And this provides a lot of secret keys, I think. So I'm really grateful that you came on the show to talk about this topic. Let's begin, as we usually do, with a check-in. And just as context for our listeners, today, when we are recording this, is Wednesday, April 15th. And this episode will be airing in a couple of weeks from now. So, like I've been saying for the last month on all of these episodes, we don't know what the world will look like when it does air. But here in Los Angeles, where Matt and I both live, we have been in a shelter in place, or safer at home, we call it down here, for about a month. And Matt and I both have 2 young kids, so we've been home, full families and all together. So that's some context for where we are today, and I just want to share that as an acknowledgement of our inability to predict where things are going and what might be most relevant to you at this point. But like all of our COVID-19 era episodes, this is an episode that is relevant regardless of what's happening in the world. And it's also happening in a human context where that's alive. So, all right, let's check in, Matt.
Great. Yeah, great to be here. I'm feeling peaceful and present. I've been working out pretty regularly in my backyard. It's like one of my pillars of support. So my body feels pretty good and I feel pretty alive. Like many people, I think I'm feeling the sweetness and the connection of family time and the not having to get on airplanes or, be away from home. There's a part of that that's super nourishing and peaceful. But it's also this kind of strange mix of anxiety, economic anxiety and health anxiety, and, watching kind of the structures of our culture fall. Things that, seemed kind of permanent and in some weird subconscious way felt like they made reality safe, right? Silly things like, oh yeah, the NBA, it's always there. It's like, nope, no baseball this year. It's kind of like weird to have that hanging over, my head, and to think about not traveling for 18 months or whatever. And so I'm, grateful, present, peaceful. And then there's this ambient anxiety that I have that is, I'd say fairly generalized, but certainly there's a lot of like acute spikes, like my cousin having COVID, or clients leaving, or evolution as a whole being really under a good degree of pressure, just like everybody else is. So I think I'm feeling all that, but I feel pretty good and super happy to be here and connect.
Thanks, Matt. I'm so happy to see you. So happy to see you. Yeah. So the other thing that, as I'm checking in here, I'm present to is our mutual love of Pearl Jam and the fact that they were going to play at the Forum tomorrow, and now we're not going to get to go.
I know.
I'm so bummed.
I canceled the appointment with my Pearl Jam buddy, Nick, and he sent me back a bunch of like hateful reactions and middle fingers and stuff. I was like, I know, dude. The new album is incredible. I haven't
checked it out yet. No.
Yeah. It's really,
yeah,
it's something. I mean, it's clear they took 7 years, and the craftsmanship that went into it, and the production and the thoughtful songwriting. It is like, in a way, maybe their best, I think, since Yield. And the last few, I know this isn't about Pearl Jam, but felt like to me personally that they were like kind of on autopilot a little bit. Modern rock autopilot. And this one, there's some like really weird, edgy stuff that clearly they were going for it. So it's definitely worth a listen.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm so unplugged from pop culture. You have no idea. I have no idea what's happening out there except for the news.
It's good.
Yeah, it is good. It does feel good. So, okay. Yes. So that's happening. That's a sad thing. Last time, it might've been the last time we were together physically. I don't know. You were playing guitar and we were up in Utah at Powder Mountain and got to do a little Pearl Jam riffing together. That was so fun.
That was amazing. Yeah. Right. I know. I miss that. I haven't really even played a bunch of music lately either. The parent band that I play in, yes, I play in a parent band with other preschool parents at my
The Mother Lovers.
The Mother Fathers.
The Mother Fathers.
Close.
We hope.
Right before everything shut down, we played this like massive 40-song set for the fundraiser, and it was a ton of work, very fun. And I was like, I need a little break, so I kind of got it. But the band is quite good, and it's a great outlet. So
that's good.
Yeah,
needing a little break. It's so interesting. So in my check-in, I can say I somehow set up this year so that I would have so much less travel than I ordinarily do. I pulled out of a bunch of things, including, a few sources of community. And, one of them being, I decided to change the nature of my partnership with Evolution. And so that last retreat that we were on, our last partner gathering in person, actually that was not the last. The last one we had was in December on diversity. Yes. But, it was a great one though. So I knew that there was this kind of vacuum opening up of what's going to come in is going to be things that come in through whatever life is sending me. And I'm not going to be flying up to the Bay Area once a month to meet with my coaching group. I'm not going to be going to these partner gatherings. And it was all kind of mysterious. I wasn't even exactly quite sure of why that was where my intuition was sending me. And now here it is, we're all grounded. I was using my kids' bathroom the other day, and it's where I keep my suitcases. And I noticed I haven't touched them in months.
Yeah.
And I don't need to have them in the bathroom anymore. I could actually put them in the attic or the garage. And wow, that's a big change. So I've really been looking forward to more time at home. So as I'm checking in today, I just feel that combination of groundedness and stability, and also that this like stirring that I have every time I get to spend some time in my garden, in my house, without structure as much around my time. And I'm very much looking forward to this conversation, knowing especially that what we had planned to talk about, is super relevant right now, super relevant right now. And the context is really different. So I feel stirred and I feel warm and very happy to see you and excited for the mind-blowing conversation that's about to unfold, as it always does with you. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So today we're talking about men.
Men. We are talking about men. Yeah.
I'd love to, can you tell us the story of men and manhood and how that got you started with the work that ended up being evolution?
Yeah, I didn't think about it in that way, but it is in the bones of evolution for sure, because Jeff Graber and I met in a men's group in 2006 in LA. We had both just moved here and got to know each other in a very, very deep way and practice personal growth with each other for, 8 years or something, really 7 years before we started working together in earnest. And we're kind of on parallel tracks in some ways. And, he started coaching and I as well, because I was in grad school. But that, I'm still in a men's group, here, how many years later, 14 years later. And it's just a huge cornerstone of my support. And it's a way that I have kind of learned about my own operating system and deconstructed what it means to be a man and masculinity in our culture, and just had a lot of growth right over the years. And so, it goes all the way back to my early years, which I'm kind of happy to talk about, and how it tracks with a lot of men, and just even like coaching a lot of leaders and founders that are male. It's not that different. I mean, they're wrestling with, some of the same things that the men in men's groups when I was just 20 years old were wrestling with. So.
What is a men's group? I actually had not heard of men's groups until shortly before I joined you at Evolution. Tell us what that's about.
Yeah, just a little bit of history. I mean, so second wave feminism in the late 70s, right, started leveling at men like, hey, you've got all this institutional and structural power, and yet you're dying earlier, there's committing higher rates of suicide, more violent crimes, basically what is this inner life of men? Like, what's going on for you? And men started just inquiring into like, what is the inner, what's the soul of a man, and what is it like to be a man? And they started gathering in northern Minnesota, what was called the Minnesota Men's Conference, led by a poet named Robert Bly. And the early days were very mythopoetic. So they were, exploring story and archetypes and all of that. But it really found this body of work where men were exploring what it means to feel and have emotions in a masculine way, around what it means to grow into maturity as a man. And they quickly discovered 5 or 6 years in that there used to be these structures specifically for men that were built into the culture, which were initiatory, right? And where men would have this like demarcation line from boy to man.
These are like rites of passage kind of thing.
Yep. And in tribal culture, there's all these stories about the uncles would come in the middle of the night and rip the boys out of their, houses where they were living and take them and put them through trials. And
sounds like hazing.
Well, I think that's kind of the modern view of what initiation is, right? It's frat houses and it's juvenile, but really what that mechanism did is it took boys, right, that were immature to men that were mature, that were of service, that were for the greater good, that were doing something that was more that was based on stewardship, right? And so that was basically lost in the Industrial Revolution. And a separate conversation, but at least culturally, women had a pathway from moving in some biological ways from being a girl to a woman, and also support structures that kind of facilitated that. And men used to, and then men started leaving the house to go work in the office, and boys were kind of left to themselves. And there was no one there really to teach them, saying like, what does that actually mean to transition to be, mature, to be present, to be kind of, a steward of your family, of the community. And so a lot of the gang culture that you see, a lot of the, aberrant behavior and, the kind of the hazing style initiations is really just this culture of immature men that we have, right? Because there's no mechanism. So,
what is an immature man? What distinguishes immaturity? I'm hearing about what maturity is, but what's the opposite?
Well, number one, I think it's understanding how you feel and what you think, and the ability to explicitly talk about that and use that to connect with another person and to be conscious and choiceful about that. The second one is getting outside of yourself and living for something or someone else, right? Truly being of service. And again, I think the way men are socialized is a lot of times they're not, and the way our culture works with male privilege is it makes it even worse because men can kind of just live for themselves and they've got all this privilege and they don't really have to like think outside of themselves or grow up really because the culture just supports them, in their own privilege. So anyway, mid 80s, a bunch of training started that basically filled that void where men could learn about themselves, learn about their emotions, learn about accountability and integrity, learn about personal mission, how to grow up and live in the culture today with the tools that it means to be kind of a modern man versus, a tribal man, right? Because they are slightly different, right? Sort of the mechanism of boy to man kind of is the same thing. And over the adult lifespan, you really see it hit at a certain point, and it's kind of become kind of a cliche where at kind of midlife, men will go into themselves and do a bunch of self-discovery. And there's actually like biological reasons for that too. And the initiation where it used to be for a 15-year-old is now happening for men much later in life.
Wow.
Generally. Yeah. So
is this related to Peter Pan syndrome?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a specific form of, I guess, neuroses. Jung and others talked about that too, where they're in this kind of innocent, naive, self-driven state in perpetuity. And yes, most of those men need to have like a wounding and testing experience where they're kind of brought to the edge where they kind of break apart and that part of their ego is destroyed and then something else comes out of it. But yeah, that's an extreme version of what I was talking about.
Got it.
So, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So going back to then the origin of evolution.
Sure. So I really invested a lot and got turned on to a lot of personal development in my late teens. The story that kind of opened things up for me was reading The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. I mean, that like I can trace my path literally back to that book. And it's an incredible primer. And I remember reading it and like the hair standing up on my arms and feeling like I was being like my life was changing as I read it. Right. And it was like, especially the way it's written for like a 16, 17-year-old young man, like it blew me away. And I was really at that time transfixed by altered states of consciousness and this like way of thinking and being that was really quite Eastern, and started exploring transcendental meditation and shamanism and different, the Silva method and different forms of personal development. And I started meeting with this Native American Vietnam vet prison counselor guy named Ted. And in Minneapolis, and Ted just fed me different things. And he's like, hey, he gave me this brochure, and the brochure said like, how's your life on it? And said the Mankind Project on it. And, I had met him through my mom's therapist, who I can kind of like thank for a lot of this, also gave me a book called Iron John.
Yes.
And it was a big book in the early 90s, pretty landmark in the culture, this retelling of a old story from Germany in the Middle Ages or beyond, really even earlier, about kind of the archetypal aspects of masculinity, the wild man, the prince, the king, the queen, all these different things, and how they make up different parts of the masculine soul or psyche. And I read that and I was like, oh, so there's a whole line of inquiry around like what it means to be a man. And then I saw the brochure sitting there and I'm like, whoa, it's a men's weekend. And I went to the men's weekend and I showed up like with my guitar ready to like hang out and like whatever. And I won't talk about it, but like you get there and like I arrive at the door and like I went in this like little phone booth space with this big, he looked like a like Russian bear wrestler. Like he had this big like Stalin like mustache and he was like 6'3" and I'm in this like little like phone booth and he's just staring at me and he's like, why are you here? Right. And it was like it was like the exact opposite of this like hangout, guitar and tennis weekend that I thought it was going to be. And it was the rest of that experience is that intense. It's like very, very in your face, very traditionally, I would say, masculine in that way. And, so I started to go through it, and there was actually a moment where kind of the pinnacle of the weekend, they give you an opportunity to look at the deepest part of your shadow, right, that you can access, and where it originated for you. And I remember the first guy that stepped out in the middle of the carpet to do his work was this guy, Bruce. I'm still connected with him. And it was a piece of work. I won't talk about it, but he just like crumbled talking about this event that had happened to him. And I had never even fathomed that level of emotionality or that level of story or that level of pain occurred in any human. And I certainly had it, but being a 3 in the Enneagram, like in a performer, I just had no sense of what was going on inside of me. And I remember just like taking a couple of steps back and being like freaked out of my mind watching that level of intensity. And at the same time, again, that experience of all the hairs were standing up on my arms saying like, this is the place, right? Like this is the place. And so when it was my turn, I went right up against the edge of trust and found a way to kind of open my heart and feel safe to express how I felt in the middle of like 40 men.
Wow.
And I was never a kid that cried in the playground. I was never, I never really felt safe to kind of express my inner world. If anything, I just tried to perform and look good and be the best and be number one. Right. And then, so kind of fast forward to the end of the weekend, there's this beautiful silent ritual that ends where you're kind of like making eye contact. And I remember just looking into the eyes of those men, and there was like, 70 or whatever on that weekend, and just feeling like my walls were starting to crumble. And by the end of it, it was like I was racked with such intense grief that I'd probably been holding for years, that me and this guy from Thunder Bay, which is like up on the north part of Lake Superior, for those of you that live on the coasts and don't have a sense of like the center of the country, we were like leaning into each other, just like sobbing into the parking lot. And I just knew, I was like, my God, there's this entire world out there that I had never imagined in myself and others. And it was so powerful and so intense. I just knew that like there would be a part of me that would do that for the rest of my life. Right. Yeah. And that was it. I was done. After that, I started doing the weekends. I started leading the weekends. I started doing other modalities and Gestalt work and stuff. And that kind of fast forward led me to where I am today and what I do. So.
And this weekend, this is what's the name of this weekend as part of the Mankind Project?
Yes, it's called the New Warrior Training Adventure. It's through the Mankind Project, which is a giant nonprofit. There are others that are similar, I would say not as intense, but the Sacred Sons is another one. What's the other one Dan Doty does? It's kind of popular with the tech millennial set right now. I'll think about it and you can put it in the notes, but there's definitely others out there. Yeah.
And this is the thing that is so striking is you're telling me that you're going to this warrior weekend to be a man, and you leave sobbing and leaning on another man. And I think for most Americans, that just seems like such a paradox. And perhaps even really unappealing to a lot of men. I can imagine, my husband is also a type 3, and that might not be appealing to him. That
he and I have the same Enneatype, same wing, probably.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's a debate. I don't know if it's 4-wing or 2-wing, but I feel both.
The wearing of black, Caneel, though, really.
The wearing of black, I know.
That's the tell.
And the aesthetics, and I know. But I think it's possible to be bi-winged, can't you?
Well, you can. Yes, there's some wing plasticity. The movement, right? It happens. Yeah, I think I presented as a 3-2 really early in my life, and I'm definitely now settling into my 4-wing.
Yeah, get a big 4-wing.
Yeah.
So this is the Mankind Project.
It is unappealing though. I mean,
Uh-huh.
and you know, the thing is like nobody's saying that you should then just like wallow in that forever, right? Because that's the
Mm-hmm.
thing. Is like, oh, it's like just feeling all the time and crying all the time, and it's like, well, if you haven't cried your whole life, well, there's probably going to be a bunch of like grief that's going to come up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, what do you want to do? And we know, right? And you can even read in emotional intelligence that like repressed emotion stays in our body as chemical deposits, adds to the stress response, builds up as chronic inflammation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you know, dot dot dot, long-term chronic disease and all of that, right? And
Yes.
so moving emotion through the body is a good thing. We know that now with through neuroscience, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
100%. So let's just say that, right?
Yeah.
The question of after that, what are you going to do with your life is a
Mm-hmm.
damn good one. And you have to answer that too, right?
Mm.
So the weekend, I would just say for any of the work that we do in coaching, right? Like this is like not specific to any gender. It's like clean yourself out, understand your operating system, but then what's your purpose and what's your mission? Because all of that crap stands in the way of you being full in the world.
Yes,
That's the thesis of what we do,
it
right?
is.
Yeah.
It is. And that's what's so different, I think, about the kind of coaching that we do from, you know, straight performance coaching or habits coaching. And it's very much about uh, unlocking your essence,
Yeah.
not fixing you or just sharpening your saw, because the saw that you'd be sharpening is rusty and kinked and um, hard to find and broken until you have done some of this deeper work. And really, they go so very much in parallel. It's like, how do I use my instrument?
Yeah. I think it's interesting people that have big personal growth experiences and, you know, healing sometimes objectively on the outside are less successful. Like they end up like, you know, starting a flower shop or like whatever. And it's because so much of our success in the culture is driven by lack, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like your father standing in front of you, watching you every single day, judging you as you grind, right? Or the
Mm-hmm.
part of you that feels like you're not good enough until you get X or Y. And so, um, you know, but the success once you do the work is more pervasive, peaceful, sustainable. It looks
Mm-hmm.
different, but we've got a culture that, by the way, socializes men not to feel, although that's
Mm-hmm.
slightly changing, and socializes this shadow driven success, I think, in a way
Mm-hmm.
that's not useful. The giant reframe, and I think one of the benefits of the era that we're living in with the quarantine and whatnot is like all of those walls are tumbling down, and hopefully some of them will remain.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know Jimmy Fallon is like sitting there on his iPhone shooting, you know, whatever, and his wife and his kids, and he doesn't look perfect, and I think like that's good. That's really
Yeah.
good for the culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a
So
poem that was posted in Evolution Slack the other day around the temptation to buy back into all that ambition that's part of our capitalist culture. Of I can use this time at home in COVID era to get better at a million other things.
yep.
And how do I monopolize on this moment? And how do I seize the day and use all this quote downtime, which the downtime is not necessarily something that's in my life. I think that, those with young kids and homeschooling and stuff, it's a really different story. But yeah, I think I'll read that poem, I think, at the end of this. It's really beautiful, and
Mm.
give a little context to those of you who are listening to this podcast right now, who may be putting some unnecessary pressure on yourself and adding further to the, unsustainability. And this is really an opportunity for us to all take a breath. So
Yep.
I'll share that at the end.
Yep.
Okay. So somehow this is the foundation. I know a lot of the men who are in evolution have also done this men's work, but I'd love to hear about how it shows up for you in working with leaders. And you've worked with some really remarkable companies and been part of incredible journeys of companies growing extremely quickly from very small to IPO. Can, maybe share a bit about some of the types of clients that you've worked with and how does this play into their journey?
Yeah. Yeah. What I would say is the beauty of MKP is it's grown. It's like a tree root, just like Est was in the 60s. That's grown into many different things: shadow work, women in power. There's a training called the Inner Yoga in the Northwest. The practices that were developed that they stumbled on that are a blend of Gestalt work and neurolinguistic programming and somatics is like undeniably brilliant. Like it is the most dynamic form of healing, of emotional integration that exists. It takes Gestalt and goes another level. It takes voice dialogue and goes another level. It just takes basic dialogue and goes another level, and is a highly experiential form of emotional and personal development processing. And so being socialized with that, and then Jeff and I being in a men's group together, which essentially takes those practices and works, right? And it's like, similar level of intensity, but a little different because it's week in, week out. It's as much about accountability and real-time talk about what's happening with your spouse or your kids or something, right? The weekend blows open the door and then you do these follow-up. Mm-hmm. But like, that's my base. Like everything on top of that, I mean, I'm glad I went to grad school after that because I know all the theory, but like what to do when the shit is hitting the fan and how to deal with somebody at their deepest levels of processing, like I can hang. And it's not an academic or abstract thing at all. Right? And so like my preference when I'm working with people is there will be a time, and I think this is it's in evolution's DNA, that we are going to go deep. And it's not going to be every time. A lot of times it's in the kickoff when we'll do like a 3-hour session and pull apart your operating system, include the Enneagram. We referred to that. It's a personality instrument, which I think lends itself to depth. You can go to
and we'll give a link to some resources about that in the show notes as well for you who are curious.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. The Enneagram Institute. But we'll take all of that and we'll help a person, I'll just say that, but normally a leader, deconstruct who they are. And a lot of times there's emotions with that and realizations about their personality and life experience and how they're showing up now. And like they'll start connecting these dots and this light bulb will go off. And when the light bulb goes off, a lot of times there's a dropping into emotion where they're just like, oh my God. Mm-hmm. And that then will cycle, right? They'll have a tough conversation, or they'll come out of an experience where they were really thrown in a board meeting or something, and then we'll go back into the depths. And the thing about coaching that is so powerful, and I think one of the hallmarks of evolution, is that the depth serves the impact. So, we may be talking about something very profane, like prep for a board meeting, or the design of your team, or your goal and business goals, OKRs. And then there'll be this threading back to yourself that happens in your own operating system and your humanity, and then the linking of those two. And it's very interdisciplinary. And that's why I think coaching is so compelling, and in some ways is a more modern, integrated form of therapy or counseling, if I can say that, although that might, frighten people where they're like, well, coaches aren't therapists. And that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that it includes healing and integration in service of impact.
I think in those moments when you're going into the depth, you're doing it in the safety of and presence of a coach who has practiced being in the depth, it can give you a sense of safety there that you may not have experienced before. And in spending some moments in depth like that, and in the depth of your feelings, gives you a tolerance, an ability to hold space for intensity.
Yep.
And for, in particular, the types of intensity and emotions that you used to avoid.
Right.
Not just your own, but other people's.
Right.
And so much of the way that many of us have lived is we make our plans, we design our organizations, we run our meetings in a way that helps us zigzag around things that we don't want to deal with, around conversations we don't want to have, and things we don't want to see in other people. Like, I don't want to see so-and-so get feel awkward about this, or so-and-so cry or get angry at me. And how much of, I'm just asking for the listeners, think about it, how much of the way that you're organizing yourself in your own personal leadership in your life and your company, it's driven by this kind of avoidance. And what if you could actually just go for the impact that you want to create and feel very safe holding space for all of that?
We talk a lot about the shadow, as you know, and talking with Luke and others, right? It's a big part of our practice at Evolution, which are the parts of yourselves that you hide, repress, and deny. And in
it's
that
episode number 2 of Aloud. It was Luke talking about shadow. It's fundamental.
Right. And so you allow it in, and there's trapped energy there, and it allows you to be full and use actually that consciously versus unconsciously, being driven by it unconsciously for good. And if you think about, the men are traditionally, although it's getting better, right? If you think of like Ross cuddling with Joey and Friends in the 90s, like that was like a significant cultural touchstone for men, saying like, okay, it's okay to touch, it's okay to feel, all those kind of things. It started to kind of change, like male being the kind of dominant and privileged gender. Organizations are constructed in that cultural narrative, which is there's like one emotion, basically anger, right? And
which by the way is a very useful emotion and often is not used effectively.
Totally.
Topic for a different show. Yeah.
Right. Healthy anger and boundaries and all that. Yeah, I know. I love it. But, so you've got this kind of, the way organizations have been designed is basically replicates the patriarchy. And one of the ways to deconstruct the patriarchy is feeling your feelings, because it is countercultural and allows in all this other stuff, diversity of views, diversity of other cultural narratives, yin, traditionally feminine energy. Let's just say like there's 2 energies in the world and men and women can have both. So it's not about gender, but you're allowing this other kind of viewpoint in, and there's just a more full expression. And I think it's really important to think about, as people are listening, that again, personal development and understanding yourself, feeling and expressing emotions is good, but you also then have to answer the question of like, when I'm feeling clear and clean, and we've all had that moment on the beach or standing on top of a mountain or sitting out with tea at a deck, where we're like, this is what I want to do, this is the impact, and I have a vision for how I'm going to achieve that. We've got to answer that question too. And I think the shadow of personal development communities, including the Mankind Project, is even though they espouse mission, there's an indulgence in personal process. And eventually you just got to say like, I get it. You may have that wound for the rest of your life, but what are you going to do in this one? Yeah. Right. So, living purposefully and of service and of mission, I think is the way. And it just so happens, right, kind of we're bouncing in with men, but again, a lot of the clients that I support are obviously men. When men reach midlife, their testosterone starts to drop kind of at 35, and then their estrogen levels are able to come up. They're able to access different parts of their brain. Neurons are connected when they have children that aren't normally there. That creates this ground to feel. And then the inquiry into like, okay, so it's not just about making money or title. What else do you want to live for? And that is profoundly dysregulating for most men, to the point of some of them aren't able to like get themselves out of that. And they just start drinking, or they fall down a hole, or they fall in depression, or they leave their marriage. And the second half of their life becomes a lot more tragic than it needs to be.
Oh, yeah. Wow. And so many of the men that we support, because maybe partly because of the industries that we tend to work with, we tend to work with technology companies and venture-backed companies, and many of these founders are really young when they begin having the role of, say, CEO, COO, CTO, and they haven't yet been through midlife. Is there some, I'm wondering if you could give us a bit of a sense of the roadmap of what does it tend to look like as a leader, a male leader, approaching midlife is also leading a company. And are there any connections there that you can help, just to help people feel a little bit more like, oh, this is actually, I'm on a purposeful path and this is normal, even though it's feeling really hard right now.
Yeah. And again, we work with high growth companies, venture backed. Evolution exploded in 2015 working with Slack and Snapchat. And then it's just been kind of consistent after that. We're in companies as big as Dropbox and Glassdoor, all the way to seed stage, but mostly in venture, mostly in tech and healthcare. And that kind of pressurized environment creates a kind of this is another conversation, but a really unique opportunity for development. So yes, there are stages. There's a book by a guy named Daniel Levinson called Seasons of a Man's Life. He's since written one for women, because the irony of kind of like the inquiry into the masculine soul was a kind of gender biased, sexist inquiry, just in the, to the indulgence in being able to kind of explore that and having the culture say like, yes, feel and take as much time to pull yourself apart. And let's just understand the male life, right? It's very, very, but thankfully we're getting better with that, I think, but it's a good book and it builds on Erik Erikson's stages of adult development. And the age of essentially 20 to 40 is a building age. And that's why, and it's important to like establish your career, make money, find a domicile, like build your nest, basically build a social network that can hold you, essentially grow out of your parents' house or wherever you were living and construct your own. And, and so that is generally where many of our founders are. And it's like, that is, to use your word, allowed. It's actually quite important to let that happen. My therapist, when I was like in my 20s, I was like a bit of a term called a flying boy. I was just going around doing different personal growth things. And, meanwhile, like my finances were a mess and I was kind of bouncing job to job. And she's like, you have got to create the container of your life. I know it's not fun. I know it's not sexy, but that is the developmental challenge for you as a 25-year-old man. And, I think it was like still in my parents' cell phone plan, right? I was privileged enough to have that. But there's a lot of people now that stretch their adolescence well into their early 30s, which is cool that our culture has that for the privileged set. And, right, it delays this individuation that needs to happen.
Individuation. Define this, please.
Yeah, individuation it's a term. It goes back again to Jung, and it talks about the psyche constructing itself in opposition to another. This is who I am. And it is literally the construction of your ego, right? And it's important, right? And so that way, standing on a stage in front of people at a pitch fest or being a rock star front person, right, leading a company, like that is okay. And many of them are able to do that and still be of service and still do personal development. And but then for most of us around 40, we're gonna be confronted with the next stage of life, right, which is a dysregulating transition time where all sorts of things happen, a lot of times preceded by something physical, like, oh my God, this thing is happening with my body. What is up with this? I'm not superhuman. And, because most men, I think, are not in touch with their body and are not generally socialized to do self-inquiry. And even the founders that we coach, many of them are still, especially male, just laser beam focused on their achievement, that comes to a crashing halt. And the individuation, the ego structure, ironically, starts to crumble. And that is an important thing. That crumbling is an important thing.
The ego, as I understand it, is the thing that allows you, your essence, your interior life that you kind of have no choice about. It allows it to navigate in a social world. It allows it to protect itself from others and somehow seem logical in a world of really illogical, internally inconsistent social rules. And it's the thing that really lets you form relationships so quickly, or at least to communicate, right?
Yep.
So the ego crumbling is a really traumatizing, scary experience.
Yep, it can be. And it depends how high you are, how much it does. A lot of times there's just, maybe a better metaphor is there's an operating system layering that happens. It doesn't always need to be traumatic.
That's good.
Yeah. But there's an old story about men specifically coming into Jung's office and being terrified, like being in some kind of thing around their mortality or existential anxiety, and he would pop a champagne bottle, right? Because he knew that it was like the beginning of their journey into a life of greater service and meaning, right? And presence. And so if you have someone that can support you in that, right? And that's where it's really important. Like the crumbling on its own and the, I've got to do it all myself kind of mentality that a lot of us have, and certainly men are socialized to have, does not work. It must be contained and mirrored back. You need to be in the center of the village. You need a guide, someone holding up the mirror that will hold you so you can then reconstruct yourself in a healthy and more complex way, where you still have all your talents, you're still able to achieve, but you're also able to be more fulfilled and do it in a more sustainable way, and likely more of service and more connected and emotionally available. But it's rocky for a lot of people. And especially if you haven't done any work, I think personally, I'm not immune from it. I think hopefully I've got support structures and I've got tools that will help me navigate it a little bit, but there's still going to be thrash, and the important thing, my friend Snake, yes, I have a friend named Snake, always talks about is men kind of start to go down as women start to go up. Women tend to come into their power around 40 in a way.
Heck yes.
Right? And so there's this kind of joke about like, well, wait a minute, like why are older men dating younger women? It should actually be the other way around, because when men are like ready to be in their warrior and achieve, there's some biology and there's also some socialization behind this. Women are ready to connect and relate.
And this is at age roughly
20s. We're talking 20s-ish into 30s, right? But then what happens is, right, family happens and the kind of the relational social neurons are kind of hit with women, and the biological role is achieved. And for men, they're, and so they're kind of like trains passing each other in the night, where men start to like feel and do art and, slow down. And then women are like starting to like go into their power. And it's a bit of a tragedy as that happens. And so, and it's great in that way, but holding it consciously, just like we do, and just knowing that that is a pattern and that it's okay. Right. And hopefully our culture will be able to support women coming into their power, at that age, and men to go into their eminence and depths of inquiry. Yeah. That broad generalizations here, but I do think there's a lot of truth to it.
I can sense even in a nuclear family system, there might be something adaptive about that there is one parent who's orienting more toward the public world and the external and coming into their power in that particular way, at the same time as there's somebody who's going more into depth and kind of coming back home in a certain way. Well, this is part of the challenging piece about, I think, being in relationship with somebody else who is your age, because when you are doing that transition, it's a lot of roles are getting thrown up and messed around with in a family.
Yeah. I mean, I personally relate to it. I think about, this sounds kind of weird, but I feel like I've had enough success, right? Like I've worked with some epic clients whose faces on the cover of magazines. I've been to some amazing places. I've, made enough money. I'm not like rich by any means, but we're fine. And, like I've checked the box around building a coaching firm. I'm like, what else do I need? Like, and so part of that is like having done it, I think, and being at peace with like what I've achieved. But the other part of it is I'm probably feeling my own descent, right? And I'm kind of ready to, part of me would be a yoga teacher, or like, open a little art studio, or go live in a cabin, right? And meanwhile, my wife is kind of chomping at the bit to like get her practice back up and running, and she's a therapist, right? And kind of go out in the world. And I'm in some world I'd be cool with that, I think, right?
Yeah, Roy and I would always, he often brings up like, why don't we just, let's just move to the mountains. Like we've talked to you about this, we were talking about moving to Sun Valley and I'm like, as long as I can keep getting on airplanes and flying around and speaking and doing my thing. And it's that same dynamic of, we're not going to move to Sun Valley, and I'm really actually glad, given how hard they were hit by COVID, that we didn't at that time. But we're still working really, really hard. But I feel that really strong desire to kind of wind things down in a certain way from him that is totally different from our life before, of really just being cosmopolitan and living in different countries and trying to be out in the world as much as we possibly could. Yep. And it's kind of a nice shift. And at the same time, I'm like, wait, I don't want to disconnect. This is my time. This is my time.
Right.
Wait, I want to bring this back to business for a moment, and then I want to talk about deep. Yep. So when a man as a leader has done this kind of inquiry and he's gone into the depths and he's worked with a coach, what is he capable of in relationships inside of an organization that was not possible before?
Yep. One, empathy, right? It's like you can't empathize truly if you can't feel. It's super important. It just doesn't work, right? Again, there's all sorts of like neuroscience behind that, right? Your social receptors get turned on. Like when you feel the parts of your brain that are flooded, like you're able to kind of then understand other people and manage relationships a lot more effectively. That's why
communicate more effectively, probably motivate people, inspire,
hold
people
influence, accountable. Right? Influence, social psychology is all influence, and that's built on our social receptors, which is built on the limbic response, which is built on how I feel, right? It's related to how I feel about you. Do you care about me? Do you get me? Do I trust you? All of those kind of things. It's like, so if you shut that off, if leadership is social psychology and social psychology is influence, and influence is predicated on empathy and emotionality, right? You just follow that chain back. Your leadership is dramatically impacted by your ability to feel yourself and feel other people, right? And for most of the people we work with, and you know this well, there is this turn from I'm the person designing the product to I'm the person leading people designing and building the product.
Yeah.
And that is a radical change, like radical, especially if you're, the technical co-founder, because you're not building the thing anymore. You're leading the people building the thing. And that is a completely different skill set. It is a human skill set. You've got to learn about humans. And most importantly, the human you've got to learn most about is yourself. That's your way in.
That is the work. It's the work in the kind of psychological sense, but it also is actually your job. And it's so disorienting because you're thinking, I'm not getting any work done. I'm spending all my times in meetings and one-on-ones, and that is your work at that point. And so, you can actually enjoy it and find the intellectual stimulation in it when you do the work.
Totally. How do I unlock this other person? How do I send a ripple across the team so there's some velocity so they feel great? How do I connect people so they feel enough trust that they can have powerful, tough conversations? How do I walk into a meeting and say as little as possible and have maximal impact? I mean, these are things that you are like, that you get the benefit of, but you've got to do the work first. And the work first tends to be a little messy because it is nonlinear. And for a computer science, degree person that is used to only working with a part of their brain that is very linear and analytical, it feels really strange and weird. And we're not asking again for indulgence, we're asking for integration. And when you integrate, the analytical brain and the emotional brain, that is a super powerful combination, right? And your leadership just like rockets. And so that's what I meant earlier when I talked about, the venture stages like seed A, B, there's a leadership challenge at each one, which is a different podcast we talked about, and an initiation, right? Going back to that old way of initiation is old way of being to new way of being, right? And old operating system, new operating system. So really around A or kind of B, especially by the time you get to B, it's like that train is passed. Like you are leading people, you are leading fuzzy, subjective feelings, people. You're spending all your time coaching and in one-on-ones and meetings, like you said, and becoming more skillful in the human dimension allows you to be successful, unless you don't want to, right? Then just become an architect and have somebody else do the role. But for most of the people we work with, they want it, and we support them in that. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's, before we leave out, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about DEEP. And I actually don't know the status of what you're thinking about. We're doing about DEEP, but DEEP is an experience that is really one of your pieces of art, I think, and one of your babies. And it relates to a lot of the things that you've shared today. And I'm actually seeing how it even relates to your initial Warrior Weekend. So tell us about DEEP.
Yes, DEEP is a approximately 72-hour intensive experience for founders and leaders and VCs. It's held in Maui. You are instructed to arrive at a certain point, and then after that, the process is a mystery. And it is a complete digital detox, cut off from the world. So you get a notebook, basically. That's it. No magazines or even books for that time. It's also mostly an essential silence other than the processes.
Wow.
And it is mirrored, and this is it's been kind of woven throughout our topic. It mirrors the hero's journey experience, heroine's journey. So the call to adventure, the meeting of the guide, the descent, the ordeal, and the return. So that superstructure that's in a lot of myth.
And we went deep into the hero's journey with David.
Right.
Also from Evolution, who's also been a part of creating DEEP, right? That was in an episode. We'll link to that in the show notes. It's a great episode.
Cool. Yeah. And so the process is meant for people to engage with their deepest sense of purpose and being of service in the world. And people have left with, Brian Garrett from Crosscut as an example, radical and transformational views of the impact that, in his case, Crosscut Ventures could have on the portfolio and the venture community at large. That was way more of service, way more integrative, way more sustainable. And it came from, that's like at the end of the process, from him going through his own journey and confronting a deep part of his shadow. And it's done in a very design forward, evocative way that uses kind of magical realism. Like the actual space it's done feels like you're in this altered reality, right? And that's all I'll really say. You should do it if you want to do it. And I would say Evolution does another one called Restore, which is a meditation retreat, very similar, but it is a hardcore in silence meditation retreat. And there's another one that's coming online whenever we're able to do this stuff again, called Ascend, which is an outdoor wilderness experience initiation. Climbing essentially a dormant volcano and exploring deep purpose in that way. And so those experiences are designed, I would say, in the most experiential way. Like rarely are you sitting down and having someone lecture in all of them. And it's designed really as a way to kind of find and unlock parts of yourself so you can be of maximal service in the world. As an offering to hold kind of the deep waters that will kind of supercharge your coaching and your role. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of track that as the state of the world evolves, and as there are more announcements about DEEP, I'm happy to share those with our audience. Thanks. I'm sure they're really interested.
Yep.
Oh, Matt, it's been so beautiful having you here on the show today and seeing your face. And I just wish I was there to give you a big hug. What a useful conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience, or any resources that you'd like to point them to before we part?
Yeah. I certainly would take the Enneagram Institute, follow that link. There are, and I'm happy to provide some links for different men's resources as well. Maybe you can do that. Just as a kind of a reminder, when we're talking about sociology and we're talking about like broad macro behavioral science, we are talking about trends, right? So everything that I was talking about are these broad stroke themes. It doesn't apply to everybody. And, it's useful, I think, to break out a part of our identity from time to time and deconstruct it, right? So if you're a man, it's useful to look at like, how am I programmed? Why? What does it mean to be a man? But that isn't the totality of your experience, and it doesn't stop there. Then you have to go to being a human, right? And ideally, we'll live in a world where gender isn't such an intense construct, and we can just be humans with humans. And even the concept of gender is fluid and open. But given the degree of socialization and biology that comes with it, it's really useful for men and those that love men to understand that about them and understand the stages and how that impacts how they show up in the world. And so it's always there. Just an encouragement for, the men listening and the people that supporting men to like get clear on what you're living for, right?
Yeah.
Why are you here? You will die at some point, maybe soon. And given that, when people look back at you, like, who were you and what did you create? And then number two, do whatever you need to do to go deep and understand the things that are blocking you from doing that. And a lot of times are very personal and painful. And number three, find some support to do it.
Yeah.
So that's it. And do the work. If we all kind of follow that trail, like, the world evolves. So
damn straight.
Yep.
Great, Matt. Well, stay safe and happy. Pull out your guitar if you're so inclined. And great talking to you. We'll catch up. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Caneel.
Thanks.
See you later.
Listeners, thank you so much for making time to be here today. I really am hoping that your family is well and safe, and you and your loved ones are as well, and that you are feeling inspired to go deeper and feel those feelings that Matt was talking about. I will link to several resources in the show notes, many of which were mentioned in the show. We're going to be linking to evolution.team/deep. And this is where you can find out about the retreat. I also wanted to mention that something that's in the works currently between myself and Evolution is we're putting together a women's circle, an online virtual coaching experience, somewhat similar to my Forward Fearless experience, but really focused in particular on women. And this will be a small group coaching experience. I'll link to that as well in the show notes. And if you're more curious about it, please send me an email. You can contact me on my website, caneel.com. The show notes are at caneel.com/podcast, where you will find links to the Mankind Project, to the Warrior Weekend, to some of the books that Matt mentioned. We want to clarify that Jung, the psychologist, anthropologist that so much of our work is based on, which Matt mentioned several times, his name is actually spelled Jung, and we'll link to something about him as well, so you can check him out. And then lastly, lots of episodes from the past in Aloud came up today, where you can go deeper into the hero's journey, and shadow in particular are ones that I really, really encourage you to go deeper into. So we'll link to episodes number 2 and 6 in the show notes. That would be Luke's episode on shadow, David's episode on the hero's journey. And we've had a number of evolution coaches on the show: Luke, Simon, David, Christine, and Janet, and now Matt. So as you can tell, this is an organization I care deeply about. And if you're interested in getting connected with a coach, contact me. I can have a chat with you and make a recommendation about a person that I think might be best. Or you can go to evolution.team. All right. Have a great week. Come back next Tuesday. And if you're interested in seeing this episode live, the actual conversation on video recorded, which goes a little bit out of order of this one. Actually, if you're curious about how it changes over time, you can check it out. It's going to be on YouTube, and we will link to that as well from caneel.com/podcast. I'd love feedback on the videos if this is a useful format for you. It's a thing that we've really been investing more in, and if it's useful to you, that would be really good feedback for us. So let us know. Take great care of yourself. Bye-bye.